Dandadan. If I asked you how its power system works, would you have an answer? If you're an anime-only watcher, the answer is probably no. And if you've read the manga, well, then the answer is still probably no. See, this is because Dandadan has one of the most misunderstood power systems in the entirety of modern-day anime and manga. And I don't necessarily believe that that fault lies with either exclusively the readers or the author. See, Dandadan in itself is a universe that doesn't focus on its own power system all that much. However, understanding it does make enjoying this universe just a tiny bit easier, because this universe offers so much more than just possession and telekinesis. There is a rich, complex, and relatively fleshed out power system that's easy to understand so long as somebody tells you how it works. And today, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing, because today we're talking New Gen's least understood power system explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for one additional Nick video a week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. There are 30 additional videos in there for you to start watching right now. So, the powers in the Dandadan universe, they're completely disjointed and not tied to each other at all. Right? Well, no, actually, all of the powers in the Dandadan universe tie back to each other. Whether those be the powers of aliens, yokai, or humans on Earth, pretty much all of the powers in the Dandadan universe tie back to one universal force, and that universal force is ki. See, ki is a form, if you're an anime fan, that you're relatively familiar with at this point in time. It's like chakra or nen. It's a life force or an aura that exists within living beings. And while ki, or at least the ability to harness ki, is relatively rare amongst humans, to the point where many humans doubt that ki actually even exists in the first place, ki in the Dandadan universe is a universal binding force that some alien races have much easier access to than humanity. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't humans on Earth that exhibit extraordinary amounts of ki, as people like Gigi, Momo, and Psycho Ayase have such a ridiculous amount of ki that they often become the targets of aliens or suspicious beings trying to suck that ki out of them. But how do these ki-based powers manifest? How do you train to get stronger in them, and what different kinds of powers can they give you? Well, let's start from the beginning and talk about how one comes into the possession of ki-based powers. Really, when it comes down to it, there are two things that decide if somebody gets powers or not. See, ki-based powers that are usually dependent on latent energy inside of somebody require proper training to bring those powers out. And the amount of time this training takes and how intense this training has to be is highly dependent on the person who's training. Momo, for example, trained her ki every single day as a child, unlocking her ki on her walk to school by keeping her hand on top of her head in this kind of shape. However, even though Momo trained in her ki every single day, from childhood into teenagehood, it wasn't until Momo came under attack of the Serpos that she recalled Psycho's training while undergoing overstimulation from the Serpos' brainwaves. And thus, a couple of things actually have to line up for at least a human to be able to unlock ki-based attacks. See, because while Momo was the granddaughter of Psycho Ayase, one of the strongest mediums in all of Japan, and even though she trained her ki every single day, it took a breaking moment for her to unlock her latent abilities. However, other people who hold on to more and more impressive ki than Momo could train hard for a couple of days to learn how to begin to harness their ki and use it in innovative attack styles. But humans are some of the only race of people in the entirety of the Dandadan universe who actually need to train in ki to be able to harness it, as other entities like Serpos or yokai are simply born with the ability to harness their ki, and thus require no training. But Nick, you say, I'm anime only and I've barely seen anybody train in their ki-based attacks, and yet everyone's running around with powers. Well, yeah, because harnessing your ki and using it to form things like hands to grab onto people or things, or form ki blasts, is not the only way to gain power in the Dandadan universe. In fact, at least in the early part of Dandadan, one of the most prevalent ways we see people gain power is through something known as aura possession. Now, this is how both Okarun and Aira gained their powers. Basically, aura possession works on the principles that if somebody gets the aura of somebody else, let's say a human gains the aura of either an alien like a Serpo or a yokai, they'll be able to use the power of said being that they now hold the aura of. This is why after Turbo Granny hid inside of Okarun, he was able to hold on to her powers, because Momo and Granny Psycho drove her consciousness but not her aura out of his body. Aira was put into a very similar situation when Acro Silky told Momo to transfer what was remaining of Acro Silky's aura into Aira's body to save her life. And in both of these situations, once the aura of that yokai is transferred into a human, that human is able to manifest the powers of that yokai at will. On top of this, whenever somebody is using somebody else's aura to manifest abilities, they will manifest a mask, and their personality will change. This is why Aira and Okarun seem so similar when they undergo their transformations. It's not because the yokai powers that they're tapping into are inherently the same, but rather, like in Bleach, when somebody uses hollow powers, they manifest a mask that represents the fact that they are using said hollow powers. But aura possession and key-based attacks are not the only way that people can get powers in the Dandadan universe, as borrowing powers is actually a very instrumental way that a lot of people in the Dandadan universe get their powers. See, the term borrowing power is kind of like an aura possession exchange, however, it's more two-sided. In the majority of the aura possession cases that we see in Dandadan, either one entity has the power or the other does. Either Turbo Granny has her powers or Okarun does. There's no in between. However, borrowing is more of a two-way street. See, borrow powers allow for powers to be lent to somebody else for a limited amount of time under a certain amount of rules. And in this equation, the person lending the power has all the power, as they're able to set rules and stipulations about how these powers should be used exactly. And this is kind of the fundament for how Psycho's powers work. See, Psycho ISA, or Granny Psycho, is able to do a myriad of really cool things that are very helpful in battle against yokai, like setting up magical barriers that either cover an entire city or just draw a small circle on the ground. And either these magical barriers are meant to keep yokai out or keep them in. However, the only reason that Granny Psycho is able to do this is because she has an ongoing relationship with the gods of certain regions in Japan. And therefore, by worshiping these gods are actually willing to lend their powers to Granny Psycho. But in order to get these powers, Granny Psycho has to visit the shrine of these individual gods for 3 whole days. But sometimes it's not even that complex. There's a character revealed pretty early on in Dandadan, actually, not quite yet in the anime, that has a guardian spirit. And that guardian spirit is willing to lend this character gravity manipulation abilities so long as the girl in this equation dons an idol outfit and starts singing. The guardian spirit wants her to be an idol. It's a long, very Dandadan-esque story. And some guardian spirits actually don't even have any stipulations, simply granting their user the ability to use their powers for the low cost of nothing. But this is still different from aura possession because the consciousness is still tied to the guardian spirit. It's just that the guardian spirit continually and willingly grants the powers that they have to the person they guard. But sometimes you don't even need ki, a guardian spirit, or even the aura of some yokai to gain powers, as there are multiple either sacred or not so sacred tools in the Dandadan universe that grant people powers. A great example of this being Okarun's Kintama, or his golden balls. If those golden balls fall into the possession of a human, they not only can awaken the human's spiritual power, but also allow for them to see yokai. There are also alien-made exosuits that give people a roster of disgustingly broken abilities, like invisibility and entry into pocket dimensions. There's weapons that steal powers from other power users and grant the person who stole them the ability to use them simply by flipping through to the ones that they want. But fundamentally, regardless of how one awakens their powers manifest in one of 6 or so camps. The first and most prominent of those camps, especially in the early parts of Dandadan, is the spiritual power camp. See, spiritual powers are accessible not only to yokai, but also humans. And for the majority of humankind, these powers stay dormant inside of them unless they interact with a being or item of insane spiritual power. However, yokai, or just spirits, are all born with this ability inherently. And the most common ability that comes along with awakening spiritual powers is the ability to see spirits, be they earthbound spirits, yokai, guardian spirits, and so on and so forth. Now, these spiritual powers encapsulate everything from Momo's telekinetic hands to Okarun's Turbo Granny transformations. But there are other, less complicated and less key-dependent ways that people can gain access to ridiculous power in the Dandadan universe. In fact, some powers in the Dandadan universe don't even require ki, or possession, or aura, or anything, because in the Dandadan universe, the second camp of abilities that you could possibly tap into fall under the camp of the power of words. Now, for those of you who have seen at least the first episode of Season 2 of Dandadan, you'll know seemingly for some reason the mother of the Kitos, known as Naki, had a ridiculous acumen for hand-to-hand combat, so much so she was able to punch Momo through 2 separate walls. However, while Naki was having this one-on-one battle with Momo, for some reason she was saying things like anaconda. This is because in the Dandadan universe there is a phenomenon that that states that speaking words with conviction can alter reality, making things that usually would seem impossible become very possible. Now, this is often seen in the Dandadan universe by somebody who's fighting somebody else, assigning a name to the move they're currently doing, which is why every single attack that Nagi threw at Momo, she was saying some kind of name, and why when she hit her with the Anaconda attack, it did so much damage. However, it's not always just physical output that's increased with the power of words. The Serpos are also well-known users of the power of words. In fact, the majority of the psychic attacks we see used by the Serpos come from their ability to tap into the power of words. Their sixth sense organ attack, or they extend their hands forward and launch a psychic attack at a target, is a power of words attack. And through the continual usage of the power of words, they're able to amp up their psychic wave attacks and even subdue targets with the immense power of their psychokinesis. And thus, pretty much anytime you see somebody in Dandadan calling out their move, they're tapping into the power of words, ensuring that with this attack, they're able to make the impossible possible. Now, the third camp that Dandadan abilities can fall into is the spiral power camp. See, like in Uzumaki, in the Dandadan universe, spirals are power. And spiral power can be applied to virtually anything. See, spiral power in the Dandadan universe is incredibly straightforward. Basically, the precipice is that all of life is dependent on spirals. Whether it be the spiraling of a cosmos, the spiraling of the double helix of DNA, or the spiraling of plants as they bloom, life is dependent on spirals to increase its strength. And thus, kind of like a shot putter, spinning in their circle a couple of times before hucking a ball up. When spirals are integrated into existing powers in the Dandadan universe, it increases how powerful they are multiple times over. Now, I'm not going to give you any examples because none have happened in the anime yet, but yeah, spiral power is very important in the Dandadan universe. But not all of the powers in the Dandadan universe are offensive. See, while everybody imbued with any kind of spiritual power is able to see things like spirits in the Dandadan universe, some people are actually better at seeing individual types of spirits than others. And thus, these additional abilities fall under the veil of the awareness type of abilities. See, Granny Psycho, who's one of the most spiritually attuned people in the entirety of the Dandadan world, is able to, while simply walking around, faintly hear the voices of astral projections. And yes, you can astrally project in the Dandadan world. I'm not going to get into it. However, other incredibly spiritually attuned people like Momo, Gigi, and Ira can't hear these voices. However, Granny Psycho, by faintly hearing the voices of these spiritual projections, is actually able to do something like making a scope out of her hand to see these spiritual projections. Something that, so far as we understand currently, nobody else in the universe can do. But these observational or awareness-based abilities don't end there, as entire groups of beings on Earth can only be perceived by certain spiritually attuned people. And this is why perception and awareness is so incredibly important in the Dandadan universe, especially when dealing with users of the fifth type of power, manipulation-based powers. See, manipulation-type powers are exactly what they sound like. They grant users the ability to control living organisms, yokai, and even possibly aliens. And these controlled beings can be summoned at will, like Jinwoo's shadow soldiers. And manipulation-based abilities are crazy broken, because so far as we understand, kind of like with Jinwoo, there doesn't appear to be any kind of range restrictions, allowing for manipulators that not only spread their field of control over relatively wide areas, but also control their subjects from very, and I mean very far away. Manipulators also have the ability to see what's happening through the subjects they control eyes, and they can delegate autonomy to their controlled beings, giving them tasks to accomplish and not necessarily telling them how to do it. And thus, all this is to say that manipulation-based techniques are crazy powerful, some of the most powerful in the universe. But since we're talking about power, that brings us to our sixth and final camp that abilities in Dandadan can fall into, which is transformations. See, transformations in the Dandadan universe are some of the most straightforward powers you're going to interact with in any anime, not even just Dandadan. Now, these transformations can really fall into one of two camps. Yes, well, Okarun and Ira's transformations into the yokai whose auras they possess is considered a transformation. There is a second kind of transformation in the Dandadan universe, a kind of transformation that anime-only watchers have actually already seen, so long as anime-only watchers have gotten to the part of the anime that introduces Mr. Mantis Shrimp. See, Mr. Mantis Shrimp comes from an alien race that's able to transform their appearances and physical abilities, and thus not only can he appear as a humble dairy farmer, human-looking being, he also has his base form that makes him look like a boxer with spiral hands and a speedo and a tie and a hat. However, However, by undergoing a transformation called Dover Demon Strong Style 24, Mr. Mantis Shrimp is able to undergo his alien race's enhanced strength 4, which not only increases his already monumental physical strength, but also his speed, to the point where every single punch he throws generates literal shockwaves. And after undergoing this upgrade, he was able to battle against Momo, Okarun, and Ira simultaneously. Now, he's not the only person in the Dandadan universe who's able to undergo some kind of physical upgrade, as these power transformations are simply a way of gaining power that's introduced with Mr. Mantis Shrimp. And as these power-ups don't necessarily fall under the umbrella of aura possession or borrowing, they exist as a unique and novel way to gain power in the Dandadan universe. Oh, that's basically everything you need to know about how power works in Dandadan. It is a relatively straightforward universe, as relatively straightforward power systems are becoming more and more popular as days go on. But considering the fact that Dandadan is one of the most popular anime on Earth right now, clearly they're doing something correctly. But what do you guys think of Dandadan's power system? Do you think it could use a little bit more complexity, or do you like it exactly how it is? Let me know in the comments below. And when you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. 9 more weeks of Dandadan content coming straight up.